Let me begin by saying I've really enjoyed being here so far this evening, sitting in the sweaty little stalls with you in the dark there, sharing these kind of secrets. I feel I've come to know some of you quite well, and I'm sure you've come to know me too. So let's be honest, shall we? Why don't we take a moment to just put it all aside and be straight with each other? Who finds it hard to talk about film? Remember, I'm a writer, okay? I do find it hard. I'll tell you why I find it hard. Have you ever gone to parties where there's that sort of secret cabal of people over in the room and they're talking about film? And you know they're talking about film because they're using all these passwords that you don't understand. Fellini, Godard, Ingmar Bergman, Akira Kurosawa, Truffaut. Who are these people? I have no idea what they're doing, and I do it for a living. There are times when you think to yourself, there's so much going on in film that it seems to have surpassed the whole idea of just enjoying a story. I don't like the sort of person who turns it into too much cerebral stuff. I mean, let's think about it this way. They take it as such a complex mental idea going to the flicks. It's just going to the flicks, and it's all so much up in the head. I like to refer to them as flickheads. These people make it very difficult for you to sort of feel like you can understand cinema. You could try and have a conversation with them. You could go over, you could try, you could say, let's say, Quentin Tarantino, Oscar Wilde. Could it be instead maybe Stanley Kubrick, Orson Welles? Well, what about James Cameron? Please, flickhead. I think that the Sydney Film Festival can be sometimes a little guilty of this, so I'm a very big fan. Because there are lots of people who wander around this time of year and they're talking about big topics like they're too hard for the rest of us to understand. Australian film is being praised all over the place. What is Australian film? I'll tell you what Australian film is. It is confusing. There are so many things in Australian film that I don't understand. Here is an example of Australian film. It's something like Death in St Kilda. A Chinese-Spanish immigrant finds it hard to cope with his chronic insomnia whilst trying to break up with his porn star girlfriend and is randomly destroyed by a wild boar that lives in his basement. This is a pitch you could get in Australian film. And this is why so many of us find it hard to understand. But you know, I actually am a writer. And I am a reviewer. And so there are many times when I've sat down in cinemas and I've started to get this feeling like I've seen it all before. And that's not because I've actually gone into the wrong cinema again, though I have done that on several occasions. But basically it's because you start to see a pattern, you know, of the same stories coming out over and over and over again. And I'm here to tell you that actually I've divined that there really are only 4 Australian stories. And if you listen carefully over the next 10 minutes or so, you will be able to survive any one of those flickhead conversations that might come your way. There are really only 4 basic stories. Now, I feel it's important for me to share this with you and help, as I do, basically because somebody helped me. I am married to a producer. My lovely producer wife is in the audience. Why don't we give her a round of applause? And also my son, Terence Malick Jr. And our daughter, Woody Alana, would like to be here tonight, but she's mostly taken up with the concept of death at the moment. It's not really helping her. But when you think about things like film, it's very helpful to have someone who understands the industry. My wife is a producer. She was a film student when we first met. Well, to be honest, actually, I think she was a film student when she was born. Our first date was actually a Woody Allen biopic crossed with Alien 4. Okay, both films back to back. There's diverse for you. The fact that we actually stayed together tells us we must both love film. But while we were there, we started talking about the idea of categories, and she actually helped me understand the very first and probably most important category for Australian film: the historical epic. The historical epic, the grand scale film set on a huge landscape with huge characters, great chores, big tasks. The historical epic. Do you know Australians love looking back to the historical epic? Okay, we love the idea of indulging in the past and thinking of the grand things that came before. And so we have films like Picnic at Hanging Rock. Four schoolgirls encounter the great myth of the Australian bush. Or we have My Brilliant Career. A woman carves out a career for herself in the Australian landscape. Or The Man from Snowy River. Now there's a quintessential Australian love story. It's a wonderful love story, and it's Australian because it has horses. Okay, Breaker Morant. More horses in this one too, but also a concept of Australian justice and injustice writ large in the Boer War. And then there's, of course, Gallipoli, which unmistakably has horses, but was also a story about mateship forged in fire and blood. And what do we like about these films? We like the idea of looking back, because everything, history included, looks better in the rear vision mirror. And so we have these ideas of big challenges and big countries and big people and big stories and big heroes and big heroines and big morals and big lessons to learn. And that is the historical epic. And we love looking back, but to be honest, we even love looking back when we feel bad about what we see. You see, there are times when we see films that don't make us feel good at all. Now, on one of our dates with the darling girl's what I call my wife, she was, I would say she took 90% of the job of actually arranging what we did on our dates, and she said to me, why don't we come over to my place and have a really fun time, just you and me? Now, I'm not going to say no to that, okay? And so I thought, yes, I can't wait, let's go. And I turned up and she said, I've rented The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith. Now, The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, if you don't know, okay, is a story about a half-Caucasian, half-Aboriginal man who is forced to subsume his character inside of white culture and is so violent in his reaction, well, let's just say that axe plays a leading role in most of the film. Fun night out? Not exactly what I was expecting, but because of it, I actually got to pick up what the second category of Australian film was, and that is basically the confession. You know, we actually go into cinemas like they're confessional boxes, and we all join together and we weep over things. And in Australia, we're very popular for doing that. We sit down and we think of all the things that carve us up. And in fact, no story is probably more told and retold in Australian cinema than the way we have treated the First Nations. Okay, so if you have a look at Walkabout, for example. Walkabout's a film about two white kids that get lost in the bush, and it's an outcast Aboriginal boy who finds them, and the only one who really understands the outback and gets them home again. Or you've got I like particularly The Tracker. The Tracker's a story about an Aboriginal bushman who's forced to track down a black brother because he's apparently offended the rules of white society. Okay, and it's very conscious. Or how about Philip Noyce's Rabbit-Proof Fence? 3 girls kidnapped from their mother, taken off to a school where they're going to be trained to be white servants, and they escape and make the long journey home. And then, of course, there's Samson and Delilah. It's the black and heart sweetheart story, and a tragic story because they realise that love is no excuse for them not having a rotten life. And then, of course, there's other things that we go to confess. It's not now just the way that we feel about our relationship with Aboriginals in Australia, but we go to Australian cinema to confess things like, well, Oranges and Sunshine, the institutionalisation of child abuse in Australia. Or there's also, most recently, Jasper Jones, the mean-spirited small-heartedness of small towns. All of these things provide us a great opportunity to confess, to look in. And as we look in, what do we see? We see dark stains on our souls. We see things that upset us, and yet we keep going back and looking at them again and again. And so that's why we embrace the third category of Australian film, and we embrace it as strongly as we can. We embrace the Kitsch Comedy. The Kitsch Comedy. Let me just say that no one makes comedies like Australians. I mean, seriously, no one makes comedies like Australians. Okay. We embrace quirkiness like insanity was, a path to a golden Oscar. I mean, it is just amazing the sorts of things that we will put up on the screen and laugh at. And generally speaking, we have this one unifying factor. We laugh at ourselves. It's Australian characters who are there. It's the people who we can almost know, who are almost in our streets. They're the people that we're laughing at there. So we see Strictly Ballroom, the over-preened environment of regional ballroom dancing. Or how about Muriel's Wedding? Two girls who love ABBA from the fateful town of Porpoise Spit, where they can basically make it if they get to the big city. Happy Feet. Penguins dancing and singing. That was an Australian idea. If you didn't particularly like it, you could always just go over and see a pig do it in Babe. Yes, there we have it now. Okay, or how about The Castle? The Castle, that quintessential Australian film that takes a complex idea like land rights and reduces it to the vibe. That's what we're talking about. Or for an Australian, the only queen that we really care about will be Priscilla on her way through the desert. It is the quirky film that also defines who we are in cinemas. And it tells us something really quite clear. Don't take yourself too seriously. It's the national cry, because we'll cut you down, and if you're not cutting yourself down in the process. Don't take yourself too seriously. And why should we take ourselves too seriously? Because basically, life is pointless. Before I get onto the fourth category, I've got to tell you another dating story. There's no real need to tell this dating story, but I just love the dating stories. I must say that one other great night was when my wife said to me, or prior to marriage, she said to me, "Have you seen The Last Days of Chez Nous?" Now, I had never heard of The Last Days of Chez Nous at that point, but I thought to myself, I must be encouraging. So I said, "Just remind me of the storyline again." She said, "Oh, it's fabulous. It's this heart-rending story of a bizarre love triangle between a middle-aged woman and her hopeless French husband who's cheating on her with her younger sister. And they live in this drab hovel of a place in inner-city Sydney, and you watch their life disintegrate." Do you want to watch it? Do I have to? But I did, and I learnt. And what I learnt was that the fourth category of Australian film is the nihilistic drama. If there's something that defines Australian film, it is this, the nihilistic drama. Now, I know you're all just nodding because you hope that no one's going to go, "Do you know what nihilism means?" Okay, let me help you out. Nihilism. Okay, nihilism is the belief that all life is fundamentally flawed, destined to disintegrate, and ultimately meaningless. Welcome to Australia. And so when we were watching The Year My Voice Broke, what did we learn? We learned that the good guy never gets the girl. He never gets the girl. And in fact, when we watched Romper Stomper, we were introduced to the violence of inner-city racism. Or how about Black Rock? There's a great Australian film where we plumb the murky depths of mateship and spend 2 hours learning all about teen rape. Little Fish, the chains of addiction, Two Hands, the really poor associations you can make in poor families. Or how about Animal Kingdom, one of my personal favourites? A Melbourne crime family devours the innocence of an orphan boy. And this is represented to us as real life, as opposed to the imagined things. And I could go on, we could talk about Chopper, we could talk about Evil Angels, we could talk about Lantana, we could talk about Jindabyne, and when we run out of the real world, Australian filmmakers tend to make up depressing worlds to get upset about. Like we talk about Wolf Creek, and we talk about The Babadook, and we talk about Mad Max, there's a depressing environment for you, and then finally we talk about Saw. Did you know that? It's an Australian creation. Yes, the first Saw film. What a kudos for our industry. We came up with the torture porn franchise. Okay, so what do we have? Well, basically, we have brief flashes of light and happiness against really black backgrounds. And if I could put it best, I would put it in the words of that great and acknowledged Australian philosopher, my mum, when she says, "If you don't laugh, you cry. And would you like some more tea cake, dear? And the truth is, she's got it in one. This has been our approach as an Australian film industry. So there are 4 basic types of film. Let me recap them for you quickly. There's the historical epic. There is the confession. There is the kitsch comedy. And there is the nihilistic drama. Now, I want to hesitate to say very quickly here that it's not like we make all of these films exclusively ourselves, as if no one ever came up with a kitsch comedy before outside of Australia. Okay, and also I'm not saying that every Australian film can be so neatly slotted into these 4 categories, but so many of them can. So many can just fall neatly into these categories that you've got to ask yourself, what is it about our culture that we feel the need to tell these stories over and over and over again? And I can tell you it's pretty easy. You just have to put them end to end. You see, if you take the historical epic and you look at it, what we are is we are dreaming of a past that we're just no longer part of, that is grand and admirable and yet somewhere so far back that we're distanced from it. We can admire it, but we can't get there. And so we talk about the confession because when we look at our own lives and the world around us, honestly, it looks bleak. What do you do in a situation like that? Do you just get depressed? No, you follow my mum's advice and you laugh. But isn't it funny that what we laugh at the most in the kitsch comedy is ourselves? And why do we laugh at ourselves? Well, it's basically because though we believe that there might be bright moments of hope and happiness along the way, it's all very much laid against a dark, fundamentally pointless background. Well, that's all we have time for this evening. I hope you had a fun time. Actually, the truth is I've got about 30 seconds left, so let me throw in one last thing for you. There's a fellow called C.S. Lewis. He's a fellow who was not simply just a great thinker, but a great storyteller. And this is what he did. He often connected how we felt with who we actually were. So he believed that how we felt pointed to where we actually belonged or who we actually were. And this is what he said: if I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, then the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world. Well, I can actually take that and I can apply it to tonight. You see, if I find in movies desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that those movies are pointing me to another world. There may only be 4 Australian types of film. You might have an argument with that, that's okay. But the interesting thing is that cinemas are full of signposts to all sorts of different types of world. Rather than pretend that the one thing you really want doesn't exist, when the lights come up, why don't you go looking for it? Thanks very much.